Full Blast Podcast, let's take a ride into the mind of Smoothie. Video games and comic books, we'll talk about horror movies. Let's go retro, checking the scene. Talk about things in magazines. We'll talk about the things that we've seen on screen and the 90s on the 19.
Here we are. We are here. What is going on? It is your boy Smoothie, but of course, and I once again invite you to come for the entertainment and stay for the journey deep into the mind of Smoothie. If you are new here, hello. I don't want to be rude. How are you doing? Don't forget to subscribe to, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcast from. Now, without further ado, it is time to get into this week's episode. So sit back, relax, pop some popcorn, pour a bowl of your favorite cereal, and let's get started. Once again, we're back, wrapping up our little series here on first run syndication programs. Just to bring you up to speed in case you missed the previous episodes. On the first episode, we talked about The Munsters Today, the sitcom and sequel to or spin-off of the 1960s classic The Munsters. Then we moved up a little bit. We talked about What's Happening Now, the spin-off or continuation of the 1976 sitcom What's Happening. Last week, we took a look at Small Wonder. I did want to mention that I forgot to mention in the episode, no, Jamie is not Billy Corgan. This week, we are wrapping up with one of my favorite first-run syndication programs. Last week, I had mentioned that it's one that is my favorite, but I'm least familiar with. That is because, quite frankly, it was probably a little too mature, a little too scary for my liking. I was always a big fan of stories. I wasn't always a big fan of horror. I used to be quite a scaredy cat, but of course that changed later on in life. But this one always stood out to me. This show was an anthology horror series created by George Romero. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about Tales from the Darkside.
Man lives in the sunlit world of what he believes to be reality. But there is, unseen by most, an underworld, a place that is just as real, but not as brightly lit. A dark side.
Alright, so I am excited to be finally getting around to doing and covering Tales from the Darkside. As I've stated before, this is the final episode in this series on first-run syndication programs. So you just heard the theme song. Tales from the Darkside was created and produced by George A. Romero. I shouldn't have to explain who he is, but in case you're not familiar with who George A. Romero is, he is responsible for Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, the Dead series. This is an anthology horror series, and it was put out initially under the Laurel Entertainment production company, and that was founded by George A. Romero and Richard Rubinstein. If that name sounds familiar to you, he's responsible for a lot of movies, most recently The Dune. He was an executive producer on that, the Stand series, and the original Pet Sematary. So he has done a lot of significant work. In total, there were 94 episodes, 89 of them being the main run of across the 4 seasons. There's one pilot episode, which was titled Trick or Treat, aired October 29th, 1983. Then the actual show was picked up, and almost a year later, episode 1, The New Man, aired on September 30th, 1984. So you had the 89 episodes, that one pilot, and there were 4 unreleased episodes. I did watch the pilot, and I thought Trick or Treat was really, really good. A good segue, a good lead into this series. Effects were great, and with a lot of these older shows, especially horror shows, you're going to get good effects and good makeup because everything's practical. This is well before the days of CGI and all the computer generated and almost fake looking stuff. To go back to what I had stated or said about not being too familiar with this, I can't, for the life of me, I was trying to remember and think back to being a kid. I would have been, between the time this was running, I would have been between 3 and 7, going on 8. And so I don't remember. I know the show, it stated, I read somewhere that it started, initially was released like late night. So I definitely wouldn't have seen it then. But of course, with these syndication programs, they ran for this time, but reruns were always coming on. And the one thing that did make me love this show so much and want to investigate it more, like I said, I probably did see an episode or so then. But the one thing that I always stood out to me from them, and still to this day, was the intro music and the narration. The narration was written by George Romero, and it was narrated by Paul Sparrer. And I got to say, it's very eerie and very unsettling. Now, in the intro to this episode, I did play a little sample, pretty much the whole theme of the show, so you can hear it. But to actually see this visual, you see this peaceful, serene meadow and farm area and trees. It's very peaceful and calm, and it's very eerie. And then with the music playing and the narration speaking over, as it gets darker and progresses, it almost goes to I would say a negative, like a picture, or rather from an old camera. There's an appropriate term, I can't think of what it is, but the screen changes and everything kind of goes black and white. It's the best way to say it. And it's just very eerie. And still to this day, every time I hear it, it's very haunting, very, very mood setting. So they did a great job with that, and they did such a great job that it did stick with me. I really missed out. In 2013, actually, there was a reboot planned by Joe Hill, Alex Kurtzman, and Robert Orci, O-R-C-I. I might have butchered that. It was never picked up, but Hill did write 3 scripts when they thought it was getting its legs and going to go somewhere. Unfortunately, because it wasn't picked up, he turned it into a book in 2016, which I have to get my hands on and check it out. I just like to see these, but I think a reboot of this would be incredible right now. I mean, why not the rebooting, remaking everything, just throw it onto the list. Maybe at that time it still wasn't ripe for the pickings, or that wasn't a thing. People are still more creative maybe back in 2013 through 2016. But now we know remakes, reboots are aplenty. So the top 5 episodes that I picked, well, not that I picked, that was listed there, I'll do from 5 to 1. Number 5 was The Circus. This was season 3, episode 1, and this aired on September 27th, 1986. A skeptical journalist travels on assignment to a sideshow. Seated in a small theater, he is greeted by a perverse caretaker who promises to unearth strange, horrible, and presumably fake creatures. The journalist nevertheless feels disgusted when he sees a demonic vampire devour an actual lamb. Number 4, always get the motorcycles coming through when I'm trying to record a podcast. Number 4 episode, Monsters in My Room. This was a season 2, episode 12, and this was the one that I chose to watch, and I'll talk about a little more in depth later. This aired on December 21st, 1985. And if I'm thinking back, this one may have been one I saw bits and pieces of. A little boy, Timmy, tries to convince his skeptical parents that there's a horrible monster beneath his bed. They learn too late that he is telling the truth. Number 3, The Geisenstacks. This is season 3, episode 5. This aired October 25th, 1986. A little girl discovers she can control her family by manipulating her doll family, the Geisenstacks, within her dollhouse. The number 2 episode, and this one of note, I didn't mention any of the other directors, which I apologize, but this one was actually directed by Jodie Foster of Jodie Foster fame. Number 2 episode, Do Not Open This Box. Season 4, episode 15, aired May 14th, 1988. An aged inventor and his wife come into possession of a box marked, Do Not Open This Box. The wife opens it and finds it empty. The next day, a man comes to claim the box, and the lady makes up a story about losing the box. The couple begin living the sweet life, thanks to the stranger, but when they finally give the box back, the man tells them that it contained a human soul. Since the box was open, the soul has escaped, and now the man needs a replacement. And the number 1 episode, Seasons of Belief. This was season 3, episode 11, and this aired December 28th, 1986. On Christmas Eve, a couple decide to preoccupy the restless children by telling them a fable concerning a massive winged creature called the Grither. The children initially balk at the story, which describes the creature as a proud, hateful beast who becomes enraged when he hears its name being spoken aloud. Although it lives at the North Pole, its humongous ear is allowed to hear its name being spoken from anywhere in the world, and the parents assure the children that the Grither is well on its way to their house to kill them. What loving parents. It was a great episode, I can't lie. That was the top 5, and as I mentioned, Monsters in My Room, the number 4 episode in the list, is the one that I chose to speak on and kind of give a summary of. So we see in this episode, we see the episode begin with a everyday little boy's room, stuffed animals, toys all over the place. And we see Timmy come, kneel beside his bed to pray. The credits, or the title comes up, obviously the credits roll, but saying what the name of the episode is. And then it cuts to the next day and we see Timmy looking at this bug, or it looks like an ant. I forget what kind of bug it is. Just intrigued by it, what little boys do, intrigued by bugs. And his stepfather, Biff, it was the 80s, comes in and, wants to have a catch with him with the football. It throws the football at him, it knocks the jar and breaks it. His mother comes in, is, upset about it, and he continues to say, I got to toughen up your boy here. He's very soft, if you will. So then we proceed to see the first night and the first instance of these monsters in his room. Again, very similar to the other, or the intro. He comes in, says his prayers, prays for everyone, even includes the stepdad in it. And as he starts drifting off to sleep, we see a monster, a boogeyman, come out of the closet. And there's also an octopus, which is mentioned in the description, that lives under his bed. He's scared, calls for his mom. Stepdad's going off and saying, oh, leave him alone. I mean, he doesn't actually say that he's scared about these monsters. He says he needs a drink. Whatever. She comes, soothes him. He goes to sleep. We get to the next day. He's practicing the piano. It is Christmas time. A football game's on, and stepdad comes in. And he's like, why don't you come listen to this game? And he says okay initially, but then he decides to go do homework because he's not into it. It's being forced into sports. He likes, as you can tell by his room, like stuffed animals and things of that nature. We proceed back into the next night. Same stuff goes on. Same kind of back and forth. Mom comes, soothes him and everything, and you hear Biff in the background giving her a hard time for making him soft. Then it's Christmas morning. He asks, in one of his prayers, you see him pray for this cuddle stuffed panda bear, stuffed animal. And he comes downstairs, and here he's given a toy gun by Biff, and he's, great, this is great. But then his mom surprises him with the panda, Merry Christmas and everything. And his stepdad's kind of like, skip ahead, go to the night. She has to go out, the mom, and leaves stepdad and him alone. And the monsters come out. But then his stepfather comes in all drunk and, gets him to drink a beer, tries to make him a man. He's not having it. And then the monsters come out again after the father leaves the room. And he's like, I'm not scared. I'm not a wuss, blah, blah, blah. They all vacate the room. So he gets a sense of bravery amongst them, goes down to the bathroom, and he opens up the door and there's a witch in the bathroom. He's startled by that. And his stepdad's like, there's no witch. Get to bed, blah, blah, blah. And then he later comes into his room. And here we see him, because he's few sheets to the wind, he's confronted by these monsters, and he has a heart attack, and he has died. I should have prefaced by saying, spoiler alert, that's the premise of the episode. It's much better than I described it here, but I just wanted to give you that little background. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but what I took away from it was, it's not necessarily monsters or things that go bump in the night that could be perceived as the monsters in the house. In this case, it was definitely Timmy's stepdad, Biff, the true monster in the house. So that was that episode. That episode was directed by James Sadwith. Seth Green played Timmy. George Malavey played the role as Biff, the stepdad. Some fun facts about this episode. So I mentioned he got the toy gun for Christmas from Biff. You could tell this was definitely in the 80s because there was no orange tip, something you commonly see nowadays to denote it's a fake gun, not a real gun. And of course, some of these shows don't necessarily age well with the dialogue or the commentary that's made. Biff, when he, gives him the gun, he said it's like the one he used on the gunboat in Nam. And if Charlie saw that thing, it would scare him to death. Probably not politically correct nowadays. The makeup and the effects were on point. Very creepy makeup for the witch and the guy or the boogeyman in the closet. And it was all practical. That was a great episode. And I'm excited to go through this whole series as well. They're only half hour. There were so many other notable cast members as I was just skimming through. Basically, I'll just run down them really quick. In the pilot, Max Wright, who played Willie Tanner and Alf, he was in it. Jeff Cohn, he was uncredited, but he played Chunk from Goonies. In Seasons of Belief, E.G. Marshall, he was Art from Christmas Vacation, and also in that episode, Jenna Von Oy, who played Six from Blossom. In The Circus, we had William Hickey, who you probably most recognize him as being Lewis from Christmas Vacation. Get me my stogies, Grizz. Bad impression, but that's who that is. Don't Open This Box. Again, that was directed by Jodie Foster, and the one character in there was Richard B. Shull. I was thinking something else too, but he had a familiar face, and I know why. He played the role of Eddie in this movie Spring Break from the 80s. I just had watched it recently, so he's fresh on my mind. But he did have a very distinguishable face. I'm sure he did some commercials. Jerry Stiller, Justine Bateman, Danny Aiello, David Patrick Kelly, Phyllis Diller, Harry Anderson. A bunch you can go through. There were some names I didn't recognize, but maybe you might be more familiar with from different things, or maybe to put a face to a name. As with many of these shows, you get these up-and-coming actors, actresses coming through and doing these roles, especially the case with Seth Green. Overall, my final thoughts, I think it still holds up today. Great makeups, great effects. You can get this DVD, the whole series, on Amazon, and now would be a great time to reboot this, maybe revisit that. Maybe Joe Hill, maybe he doesn't have any interest in it. That was my take on Tales from the Darkside. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did it. I hope you enjoyed this series, and thank you for tuning in, of course, to this series.
The dark side is always there, waiting for us to enter, waiting to enter us. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight.
And Finn. That is going to do it for today's episode, and that is going to do it for this series on first run syndication programs. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed making it. I've enjoyed doing the research, kind of, sort of. A lot to take in at once. Stay tuned, because we have other exciting things coming up on the podcast. I think the next thing, well, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what the next thing is. You'll have to tune in to find out what the next thing is. But I hope you enjoyed this show and the series overall. Let's keep this conversation going. Head on over to Facebook and give a like to the Mind of Smoothie Facebook page. And while you are there, feel free to join the Mind of Smoothie and Friends Facebook group. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Mind of Smoothie. For video content, visit youtube.com. You guessed it, /Mind of Smoothie. And for all other news and updates, visit mindof.smoothie.com. Thank you, as always, for listening. And until the next one, take care, God bless, and stay smooth.